So hopefully you've taken a look at Chapter 10. I have reserved my opinions on it until this very point. To me, it feels like a catch-all chapter. I don't know why the authors have chosen to group these specific concepts together and think that there is a strong relationship with them and they belong in a chapter together. So I am going to just gloss over some of what's in here to get to what I think is the heart of what's worth knowing and really spending time to invest in and understand better and recognize that it can be applied in our own lives. So to begin with, we are going to think about the idea of intimacy. We do get a really good definition of intimacy and learn that there are lots of different types. Frequently, when people say they were intimate with someone, we automatically think it's a physical nature of relationship engagement. But intimacy has a lot more areas that are involved. The definitions are really clear and thorough. And what we want to recognize is that the type of intimacy that we seek is appropriate in some relationships and not others. And what we want to do is always align what it is that our relationship has as far as boundaries. This is where chapter 9 comes into play really well. At what stage in the developmental model is your relationship, and what types of intimacy are appropriate within that? And again, that's just within what we would perceive typically as a romantic relationship. We have intimacy in non-romantic relationships as well, because as you learn, there are a lot of types of intimacy that aren't physical or sexual in nature. We connect intellectually and we also connect emotionally, and we support people in lots of different ways. But when we do want an all-encompassing relationship, we really want all three types of intimacy to be blending and present. Because if one element is missing, it's a completely different type of relationship that is happening either at the creation point or what ultimately happens if something goes away. The relationship is not the same type. So that's what I think is really important regarding the ideas about intimacy and thinking about, what does communication look like? We probably have to think about communication in both verbal and nonverbal contexts when we think about intimacy and try to make those connections. In addition to learning about intimacy, a key idea is that so much of what we learn about communication within group settings, and again, I don't know why this really fits within chapter 10 the same way as the other ideas, but we learn things from our families. I think it's true to say that within communication and relationship ideas, we learn from experience, and it's not always just families. We learn from the people around us. The big question regarding development is frequently, is this nature or nurture? And within the context of what we think relationships should be, it's usually nurture. It's what we've seen, either firsthand or even secondhand. The media influences greatly what we think about as far as what family structure looks like, what a marriage should look like, what relationships that are romantic should look like. And that's really what we can learn about by understanding families a little bit better. But it is worth going through and trying to identify what you experienced growing up as far as family structure and who was allowed to communicate openly, who was not, how decisions were made, what was the diffusion of power within your family, and thinking about how that shaped your perceptions now regarding relationships and family interactions. And then if you have a family of your own, what is the structure that you have created and continue to foster within your own family? It can be interesting, it can be revealing, but this is, again, one of those areas. It doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, and I try to focus on those transferable ideas and universal skills and concepts within communication. We learn in chapter 10 that there are lots of different types of friendships. I don't think any of us didn't already know that. So it's probably a review, and it might give you a couple of different categories. But what I think is really, really fantastic in chapter 10. And again, the thing that I'm going to talk about more than anything else is how we can recognize when people are trying to express love in a relationship and they're not doing it verbally. We could give a lot more credit to people, or if we learn to interpret the nonverbal communication a lot more, we can understand that people are trying to express just how meaningful you are to them if we recognize what that nonverbal communication looks like. So, Gary Chapman is an author who created a book. It's really, really popular. This is a little bit less academic than lots of the other concepts in our book. It's not based necessarily on research, but it is really thoughtful, and I think it's insightful, and it's summarized in the back of chapter 10. But Gary Chapman wrote The 5 Languages of Love, which is almost a guide as to how we can start to recognize different expressions of care and the symbolic meaning of what it is that we encounter if we select different elements of communication and we organize some certain things into a scheme that has the interpretation of this is an expression of love. We might recognize that there's a lot more, especially if we don't hear those words a lot. Because affirmation of love in a relationship is really important. It's something that I find extremely vital, and I recognize that when I am not expressing things as much, it means that I'm not as happy, and that it's a prompt that more communication should happen, or we might be moving to a different stage within the developmental model. What is it that needs to happen to make sure that this remains a healthy relationship? So the 5 love languages have 5 categories. They really have nice labels, and I think you will understand them and recognize when other people do this for you, but also think about how you choose to act in a relationship as well. What are some of your expressions of love that aren't necessarily the words I love you or you're important to me, you mean the world to me? All of those things are great, but they don't always feel like the right thing to say. So what is it that we're doing in addition to all of that? So the first, words of affirmation. Sometimes we do use language, but it's not I love you that we say. What are some of the other terms that really, really make a difference to us? Frequently in relationships, we've developed just kind of code language. We have inside references, and the use of that is really affirming. For me, I just like sending text messages randomly. I'm thinking of you. Hope you're having a really good day. A reminder, if you haven't taken your lunch break yet, do it. You keep on working through them. All of those are words of affirmation. I don't say I love you in those particular words, but I am valuing the person and valuing the relationship. It's one thing that we can do. We can also choose to spend quality time with people. And I think the word quality there is up for lots of interpretation. What is quality to you? What is quality to the other person? Sometimes it's sacrificing your preferences to do what the other person wants to do, recognizing it as a sacrifice and a willingness to give up what you want for the other person is an act of love. And hopefully you experience this as well, but the quality time is valued by the other person, and it's good to be able to recognize it when it happens, and hopefully it's happening. So in addition to words of affirmation and quality time, frequently we experience love through gifts. This doesn't have to be big, grand, or formal. I like to think I'm a really, really good gift giver, especially when I have money. I like to do bigger things, but I don't always have the same amount of extra money for things. Incidentals in life are expensive, but it doesn't mean that gifts are unapproachable. I have fallen in love, I will admit this, since moving out to this area 4 years ago. I have fallen in love with grocery outlet bargain market. Food is important to me. I like finding new, interesting things and trying lots of different things. I mentioned that I like exploring earlier, but exploring different foods and trying new things is so fun to me, but I don't want it to cost a lot of money, especially if I don't know if I'm going to like it or not. And Grocery Outlet has been a store or a chain of stores that lets me try so many things. It lets me embrace that exploratory nature and this desire for novelty in my life by just spending a fraction of what it would be other places. And frequently when I'm at a store like Grocery Outlet, I see things that remind me of the friends and family and loved ones in my life. And I'm like, oh, this person would absolutely love this, or this is one of the favorites of this friend. And I am, willing to spend that 25 cents sometimes to buy something. And when I gift it, not only is it just, I spent money on you, but that whole idea that I saw something and it made me think of you. That's powerful. That's meaning. It is truly an expression of love, even when it's a small, small gift with not much monetary value. So think about when you give and receive things. What's really happening there? Is there a deeper significance and meaning? So acts of service and physical touch are the last two categories. Those two make a lot more sense. And again, what is really being expressed when you engage in these things and when other people engage in things? A lot of it depends upon what the nature of your relationship is. But when it's a relationship that has intimacy, does it mean more than I'm just doing the routine act of service? It's my turn to take out the trash or I wash dishes. It might be something more. And in the chapter about nonverbals, chapter 7, we learned about haptics, how much we can express through touch. It comes up here again, thinking about what it means. You might not be into public displays of affection, and a person that you're in an intimate relationship might not be also. So what does it look like to use touch as an expression of love if it's uncomfortable? Or what if you're in opposite places with whether or not you like this? How much does it mean? How welcome is it is another piece of it. So physical touch, as well as the acts of service, gifts, the words of affirmation, and spending quality time together. They are all different manifestations and could have different meanings. What is your perspective of these things, and can you come up with a perception check? I think it is really, really a great idea to pair with these things. If you're trying to interpret things, it's like, okay, I jumped to the conclusion that you just bought me this because it was on sale, but if I conduct a perception check, I can describe this event. I can come up with two different explanations. Which one is right? Ask the person. And even asking sometimes is developing a reason to have an exchange of relational messages and some meta communication that is going to be very, very beneficial and meaningful in your relationships. So that's the stuff in chapter 10 that I really, really think can be so good in your life. And I like to be able to provide those things that, this can be good. This can make a difference. And in chapter 10, we get some of that. And again, I hope you get to experience some of that good yourself.